Let me ask you, did you find that a puzzling passage? Did you? Did it sound like it had bits and pieces of things you'd heard other places? Anybody? Did it almost sound like a summary? Did it feel like you were coming in at the end of a movie? Or reading the end of the book first? That's how I felt when I read it. Well, we could just work with it just the way it was. I considered that option. Or we could take first things first, which I always think is a good way to go. So that's what I did. I went back. I thought, what the heck was going on here before this passage? Always tempting when you've been given a little bit of something. What went on before this? And I went backwards. And if you want to, you can look. This was out of 12. And you can take, if you want to, you can look and see what was going on earlier in 12 and maybe even 11. And I kept backing up until I found those passages we looked at, like the Good Samaritan. We had a sermon on that. And the Lord's Prayer, that was the last one that we had a message on from Luke. And then after that, I noticed that Jesus goes throughout the land preaching and teaching and healing. And the crowds get bigger and bigger. And he gets more and more possible disciples and more possible enemies. And everything starts heating up. And the conflict grows with the Pharisees and the scribes and the lawyers. And I started to think about that conflict. And I thought, it really can't all be this. It really can't be that. It can't be as simple as that. But we humans, we like things to be that simple, don't we? We like it to be all one way or the other. We like it to be all black and white, if possible. We try to make it be that way. And those Pharisees, remember, some of them were. Some of them were self-servingly criminal. Some were. Morally, politically, monetarily. Some of them were just that bad, and there was no defending them at all. There were some like that. And some were, however, well-intentioned, but they lost their way theologically. They were very, very strict about the laws. They knew a lot about the laws. But they lost sight of the God who made the laws. Jesus even says, Pharisees, you work really hard to keep the outside. This is, if you want to look it up, it's 11:39 to 41. You keep the outside of the cup so clean. That's what you work on. Now, Jesus is God, he says. When you see me, you see the one who sent me. So how can God incarnate be so opposed to these who study so vigorously and know the law so well, and they work so hard to enforce the law that they are supposed to enforce, And it's God's own laws. How can God be so opposed to these people who work so hard to know the law? Does that make any sense? Theoretically, they're just enforcing God's laws. The problem, Jesus says, is you know the law, but what I care about is what is contained within the law. This is what I care about. This is important, but it's this that matters more. That's what Jesus tells them right there in Luke. The law is just the outside part. What I care is the inside. This is my sermon. My sermon written at 30,000 feet. It's not quite as neat as it usually is. So what we do is just the outside. What we believe, what's inside us, is what is inside. And that's what God cares about. What's deeply ingrained within us is what matters. And the word for what's inside is love. Love. That's what God cares about. That's what matters. How well we love. So, how well do you love God? Remember, that's commandment number 1. If we're talking law, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. That's law number 1. That's the most important thing to God, more important than anything else you can do. Stop polishing the outside of the cup and just love God. It's the only thing God really cares about. How well do we love God? Can God count on our faithfulness, our trust, our respect, and our devotion? Or do we hold parts back? Parts of our life? Do we hold parts of our heart back? Do we hold parts of our mind back? And if we do, and most of us do, I know I do, have we considered why we do? Well, we're human. We're human. And we're wired for survival. Thank heavens. God created us, knows us, loves us, and understands us. But we're wired for survival. And part of our wiring is something that we have to work against all the time. It's fear. It's part of our wiring, but we have to work against it. It's fear. God gave us fear to help us survive in primitive times, or if we find ourselves in primitive times now. The problem with our sinfulness is that we keep thinking we're in primitive times when we're not. We're not always in primitive times when we think we are. It shouldn't be our always everyday default mode. Because when we're fearful, we can be manipulated. We can be off balance. We can make bad decisions when we're fearful. And we lose all of our joy when we're fearful. God does not want us to be anything but joyful. God created us in love, for love. And so Jesus says to us, fear not, little flock. And I wish I had enough fingers and toes to count for you how many times in Scripture Jesus, God, angels come and say to us, fear not. Can you think of how many times you've heard that in Scripture? We have to keep being told that because we keep forgetting. It's not that there's nothing to fear. Then and now we keep behaving like sheep, and sheep are loved creatures. And there's certainly things to fear out there, but remember this, what to sheep is a terrifying sound that could sound like the end of life itself to the sheep. To the shepherd, it's just a rock falling. Okay? So God says, little flock, I know you're scared. Trust me. It's just a rock falling. Be at peace. And then, in this summary that we get in our lesson today, Jesus moves right on to sell your possessions and give alms. Well, really? Literally? No. No. Not really. Not literally. No. Jesus does not mean for all of you to cash in your 401ks and live in a cardboard box on the streets of Muncie. No, that's not what Jesus means. But this just means, again, don't be afraid about your survival. Don't be afraid about that. Do not struggle about this. But it does mean simplify your lives. If you looked back in chapter 11, Jesus told a bigger story about the man who kept growing more and growing more and growing more and building bigger barns, and then all of a sudden a lightning bolt struck everything and they all burned to the ground. And Jesus' point was, look, it can all be gone in a heartbeat. So why spend all your life, your time, and your energy doing all of that when it could all be gone? Don't do that. That's a waste of your life. Simplify everything. Be rich with one another. Be rich with God. And I have a suggestion. Tip more. It's a small suggestion. But if you can afford to go out to a restaurant to eat, and maybe some of you can't, but if you can afford to walk into a place and sit down and have food prepared and brought to you and have your dishes washed for you, then be very, very outrageously generous with the person who in Indiana gets paid $2 an hour by the employer and only gets for his or her salary what you give them. That's all they get in Indiana, is what you give them. And I see people calculating carefully to the penny. And I think, give me a break. Be generous with those servers. Why not? Use that as an opportunity to spread. You know that person's working. This isn't a big moral decision for you. That person's working hard. Be generous. It's just a suggestion, and I bet you can think of others. Be generous with one another. Be generous with God. The next one says, be dressed and ready for action with lamps lit. And of course, that's a reference back to the waiting for the bridegroom and all of that. But what does that mean? Well, I suggest it means to watch for something surprisingly wonderful from God. You know, if we change our focus in life, God can delight and surprise us every day. So let's take our vision off of the television that feeds us horrors. Oh, and here's another thing. You know, I would love it if there was some sort of rule that told the cable news that they could only put the story on one time during 24 hours. And then they couldn't show it again for another 24 hours. You know, they'd have dead air so fast. You know, they could only just tell me about the plane crash one time, and then that's it. Tell me about that terrorist bombing one time and be done with it. They do it so many times over and over, you'd think that there were 400 of them every day, and there aren't. Anyway, okay. And now, if we would just take our focus off of these terrible things that go on, that they tell us with such sorrow and delight, take our focus off that and look for the wonderful things, the heroic things, the small, joyous things that people do all around us every day. And you will be so amazed at the good that's in the world. Now, when you get good at this, and if you try it for very long, I promise you, you will get good at this. You will see an amazing amount of God in the world. And you'll start to kick yourself in the behind at what you have been missing and how you have been hog-swoggled by those that have been making you lose sleep at night. I'm not saying that there isn't real horrendous evil out there. I'm not saying that. I am not. I'm just saying there is so much more good than evil. Just the very fact that we all stop at red lights and wait for the green light to come on. Why? Why do we do that? Because we're basically good, civilized people. We don't have to do that, but we do. Doesn't that mean something to everybody? I mean, we behave so well. Okay, so when you catch on to what goodness there is and what wonderful things God creates, you will be amazed. So the next one, if the owner had known when the thief was coming, what an interesting image God uses to start talking about the second coming. In the first century, you know, they thought it was going to happen. It could happen any minute. We don't know. They didn't know then, we don't know now. Just because it hasn't happened in a long time doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But one thing we do know, God is always present. God is right here with us. God is right with you every moment of every day. You are never alone. God is right next to you, and all you have to do is start talking, and God is right there listening to you and giving you an answer. We should live our lives like the second coming could happen anytime. You should. You should be prepared. And wouldn't that be great? It would be great. I mean, one day, you could check your email or drive by the church out front, and the sign could say, or your email could say, in great big capital letters, it could say, at St. Andrew, in our fellowship hall, God is serving a meal. Special family dinner. He has come. He has come. It's a surprise. Surprise! All are welcome. Come on over. Now that would be a great day. That'd be a great day. That's what Jesus says. But first things first. First things first. Let's start with right now. Let's prepare our hearts. Let's put away fear. Let's learn to love. It's not so hard. It's easy. And it's wonderful. Let's learn to love.